Hey everyone, so today I'm dealing with the fun task of trying to manage the powdery mildew that is all over my zinnias. It's not terrible, but it's also not like the lightest case of powdery mildew I've ever had. So I think what I'm going to do is I will give you a little powdery mildew tour around the zinnias. I'm on my front deck because that's where most of the zinnias are. And then I'll talk through a little bit more about what exactly powdery mildew is, some things you can do to try to prevent it or treat it once it shows up. So let's go ahead and I'll take you around and show you what so far is impacted. Now the good thing at least is that if I stand far enough back, everything still looks super green and healthy. So if you're taking any photos, just step further from your garden and I promise you it'll look fantastic. But I have zinnias here. These are all my queen lime zinnias. I have some zinnias there. I have them in that grow bag and I have them back there. And there is powdery mildew on all of them. So let me first come in because I think it's probably the worst on these. Now again, it's not terrible. I've had worst cases in the past, but I've also had better cases in the past. So you can see here the powdery mildew on these leaves. It's much worse if we get in closer here, and I will talk you through what I'm planning to do. I'll show you actually doing it, but basically any leaves that look this bad are getting removed, but I can't remove all of the leaves with powdery mildew on it because that would be most of the leaves. But we're going to do some pruning, we're going to do some cleanup in here. I will talk you through that in just a little bit, but that's what these are looking like right now. Then let's head over here to this bed. Now this one is actually probably the best of all of them, but there is still powdery mildew. So there's a little bit, the camera does not want to focus today, there's a little bit there, a little bit on these leaves over here, probably a little bit worse. Actually not too bad on the inside in here. Then coming over to this back bed where I think the only variety I have of zinnias in here is the envy zinnias, which I love because they're really pretty, but that also means I don't want to lose them to the powdery mildew. But again, I think you can see here all of the spots on the leaves there. And this side, even though I feel like it's more compact in there, which lack of airflow can lead to powdery mildew, these actually seem a little bit better. And then the last section of powdery mildew is over here. So I have my giant binary zinnia. This is the coral. I have one of the floret zinnias back there, and then another giant binary zinnia in the back over there. And then I do have one more, which is another floret, and this one is in a pot all by itself, so it has the most airflow. So it has the least powdery mildew, but there is still just a little bit of spotting down there. Now before I go around and start actually working on the zinnias, let me talk a little bit about what powdery mildew is. Again, some of the things you can do to try to prevent it, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do to actually try to keep it under control. So first of all, know that powdery mildew is a very common fungal disease. Of course, though, I was often asked, because I've been growing zinnia since 2020 here, and I was asked how I didn't have powdery mildew, and I was like, you know what? I don't know. I just never get it. And then 2022, bam, I got it. I feel like I just know it's going to be here every single year. So it is incredibly common. It doesn't mean you're a bad gardener, because I felt bad when it first popped up, like I did something wrong, which maybe I didn't follow all the best practices, but I feel like no matter what I do, it's going to show up at some point in my garden. Now this actually affects, I think the number is like over 10,000 different types of plants. Where it shows up the most in my garden, definitely on the zinnias. It's always the worst on the zinnias. I have also had it on cucumbers, zucchini, any type of squash plant, melon plant. It was actually on my apple mint. Earlier this year, I cut the mint all the way back. It flushed back out with new growth, no powdery mildew, so that was nice. I do sometimes get like a little bit on my dahlias or my China asters, but those don't seem to get taken over quite as much as I've had like my cucumber plants in the past, or my zinnias get taken over. So that's just what is impacted most for me in my garden. It might be a little bit different, but I know zinnias are probably like the number one in most people's gardens that are susceptible to powdery mildew. So powdery mildew loves warm, dry, humid weather. So what I mean by dry and humid is that it's humid in the air, but it's not actively raining. I used to think that if you got water on the leaves, that was the cause of powdery mildew, but it's actually not. Water on the leaves can actually prevent the spread of the spores, which is very interesting, and again, kind of the opposite of what I'd originally thought. But it's humidity that they like, and then when it's a hot, dry day, still humid though, that's when the spores can spread. So they do not like rainy weather, and they do not like cool weather. For me, it typically doesn't hit until August, so I definitely had a prevention plan in place, and then it was so much warmer, so much faster here, that it showed up before I even was expecting it or was even prepared for it in my garden. And it kind of aligned with when we were out of town for the Cape Cod Hydrangea Fest, so it was like I wasn't even here when it really started to take over, because of course that's how it would work out in my garden. And powdery mildew is very tough. It can even survive outdoors over winter on debris, so I will be removing some stems, some leaves of powdery mildew, and they'll be going straight into my trash can, and the lid will be going onto the trash can, because don't compost them. If I'm pruning healthy leaves, for example, sometimes I will just lay them down on the bed potting mix to break down. Don't do that. Get them into a garbage can and get them out of your garden. You don't want any of that powdery mildew still sitting around in your garden, again, even over winter. Now, how does it affect plants? So if you are lucky enough to just have, well, if you're lucky enough you don't have any, but if you're lucky enough to just kind of have a mild case, it won't do much to the plant other than just kind of make it look not as healthy and not as green as it would. But if kind of left to do its thing, powdery mildew, typically for me, will spread and become a lot worse. And that can start to inhibit both the plant growth. You'll see smaller flowers, you'll see leaves that are dying. So I don't want to get to that point. So right now, as I was touring you around, you can see the powdery mildew on the leaves, but the flowers are still incredibly productive. And you can't cure powdery mildew, like it's not going to go away, but as long as I can try to maintain it, fingers crossed, I think, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, it was really powdery mildew that took out my zinnias because I just wasn't on top of it. So that is my goal for this year, especially because it came earlier and I don't want to lose one of my favorite cut and come again flowers any earlier than I need to. So I have here a list from, I think it was the Minnesota extension, of kind of the conditions that favor powdery mildew. Some of these you can avoid, some of them you really can't. But the first is shady spots with low airflow, which my deck is full sun, so planting in shade is not an issue for me. I still get powdery mildew, but the leaf canopies can create shade on the lower leaves. So I do find that that is where the powdery mildew is the worst, is where all of the branches are kind of intertwined over each other and creating that shade underneath the canopies of the plants. Powdery mildew also thrives with humid nights that stimulate the spore production, and then they love warm, typically 70 to 80 degree Fahrenheit, which is what we are most of the summer until we get up into the 90s for a few weeks in the middle. But they love warm, dry days. And again, that is really what we've been having. Well, we either have like 3 days, I feel like, of straight rain, which again actually helps to inhibit the spread of the powdery mildew, and then like a couple weeks of just the dry, humid days. Unlike other leaf spot fungi, powdery mildew fungi don't need moisture on the leaves from rain or dew to infect. It can actually inhibit the spread. So it also says here that some powdery mildew require high humidity, but others can germinate even in low humidity. I do have friends that garden in like low humidity climates, and they just do not have this issue that I experience here. So again, we are warm in the summer, we are humid in the summer, and when we don't have a lot of rainfall, that's what really helps the powdery mildew to spread, which is, again, basically Chicago summer in a nutshell. So even though there are some things you can do to prevent, our just general environment here is really beneficial for powdery mildew. So here are some of the prevention tips. Now, the first one is to space plants properly. I did that in my center raised bed. I spaced them about 8 inches apart, which was recommended. I could probably space them further, like the one I showed you that's by itself in its own pot definitely has the least powdery mildew, even though there are still some spores there, probably from the other zinnias. But again, in a small space garden, it's a hard trade-off because I don't want to just have 3 zinnias and lower my chance of powdery mildew, but then feel like I'm wasting space. I do also have petunias in the center raised bed, and I'm wondering if that kind of commingling with the zinnias decreases airflow, but I love them so much, I don't think I can let them go. So that is one of my challenges. Even though I do feel like I gave plants a little bit more space this year, I still have powdery mildew. But again, it's not as bad, so maybe those extra inches helped a little bit. The next prevention tip is to prune your plants. Again, anything that's going to increase the air circulation. I'm better this year than I have been in the past, but I'm probably still not great at keeping up on that. I feel like after the rush of getting all my plants out in the garden, I kind of just don't do anything for a bit, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I need to start doing all of the maintenance tasks. So one thing I'm going to do today is prune off probably a good amount of the branches, especially the lower branches that are maybe hitting the plant next door to it, and just creating a little bit more airflow within the raised beds. Next tip is that you can plant resistant varieties. Now the resistant varieties that I've found, and let me know if there are more in the comments below, are the Oklahoma series, which I've grown in the past and I don't remember them being as impacted. And then Zahara is another one that came up as a powdery mildew resistant variety. So maybe I'll try some of that. My problem is I love the zinnias that are not powdery mildew resistant. So we'll kind of see if I switch it up at all with the varieties, but when I fall in love with a variety, it does make it worth having in the garden for me, even if I do have to deal with issues like the powdery mildew. You can also remove the lower leaves throughout the season, which that was my intended plan, and then like I said, things just happened a lot faster than they normally do, so I was not on top of that, but I have already been removing some of the lower, more damaged leaves on the plants. I'm going to continue doing more of that today. And then you can also spray with a fungicide, which I do have one. I'm just not sure how effective it's going to be, because that's typically more effective for prevention than when the issue is actually here. And I think this was from the same exact extension. I'm pretty sure it was from the Minnesota extension, but it says, yeah, fungicides will not cure or remove existing powdery mildew infections. I don't think there is anything that removes it except pulling the whole plant, so let me know if there is something you know that can get rid of it. Fungicides must be applied to healthy green tissue early in the growing season before infection begins. It says repeat applications necessary throughout the growing season. Fungicides will not cure or remove existing powdery mildew infections. Once the majority of the leaves have the leaf spots, it is too late. So I don't know if I'm actually going to use it. I did use it on my fruit trees early in the season just as prevention as recommended on the label. Again, my plan was to use it on my zinnias, and then I kind of missed that window. So I have it. We'll see how I feel, if I'm actually going to use it or not. I'm really not sure yet. So my plan of action today is going to be to go around, cut off some of the branches, then remove some of the more heavily infected leaves, because cutting off the branches, I'll do that first. That'll get rid of a lot of the leaves, and then I'll go ahead and individually pull leaves off. Again, going straight into that trash can, putting the lid back on, and then also I have here my pruners, and because it's so easy to spread, you want to wash your pruners before you move on to, well, usually between every plant, I'm going to do each section, each raised bed, and I'm also not going to wear gloves. Because for me, if I'm washing these in between every raised bed, I'm not going to be able to wash my garden gloves in between every raised bed. It's much easier to wash my hands. So whenever I'm dealing with any sort of disease or fungal issue, I typically will use my bare hands. Now, I also do have sensitive skin, so I have realized if I don't wash my hands pretty immediately, I can get a little bit of itchiness. So should I be doing this without gloves? Probably not, but I'm going to anyway. And then if I do wash my hands right after, it's always been just fine. So that's going to be the plan. So we'll start with probably the center raised bed, because that seems to be the worst. And then I will work my way around and we'll see what it looks like after we are all done. Okay, so I have my pruners, I have my garbage can, and I'm just going to go in and start cutting these branches off. So what I'm looking for in terms of removing completely, well, first of all, I have been getting some weeds, which luckily in a container garden they're not too difficult to manage, but clearing them out can help with airflow. So I am going to pull some of this out. I also have been doing a better job of keeping the petunias kind of on the outside of the bed versus the inside, because sometimes they can start to kind of creep through there, which I like the look, but that's definitely overcrowding. So what I'm looking for in terms of what to remove completely, for example, if I come in here, there is this like just tiny branch. I'm just going to take the leaf off. That's going to grow back that direction. So I'm going to take that off. And again, I think mostly I'm going to pull probably from the bottom here. And then also at the same time, just removing the leaves that are already starting to die and turn yellow. Does it kind of make the zinnias look a little bit funny? Yes, but it isn't necessary to take this off. I have also been walking around, well, I do that all the time, and I've noticed so many zinnias just sitting out in parkways, super crowded, no powdery mildew. So I just happen to be lucky with that in my garden, it seems like. So again, right now I'm just kind of taking off the leaves that look a bit worse than the others. And the hardest part for me really is removing branches because they can become flowers. But I know that the airflow is what's going to be important. So I think I'm going to take off this one because that is starting to grow towards that other one, just to keep a bit of separation here between the different zinnias. I'm right now removing a couple lower branches from the plants next door. And if worse comes to worse, and these just really get taken over, I'll pull them out and plant something else here. I am okay with that. I just love the zinnias so much that I prefer not to have to do that. And just to show you too, it's not only the top of the leaves. So if you are treating with a fungicide, then you also want to make sure to spray the bottom of the leaves as well. Just removing some of these smaller branches and then just picking up this plant, taking off some of these dead leaves. And I'm just going to keep working through this bed and then the other beds doing the same process. So I'm going to speed this section up because it's going to be very repetitive, and then I'll let you know if anything interesting happens while I'm doing it. But then I am going to take out the bottle of fungicide. I'm going to read through it, see if it talks at all about actually treating versus prevention, and then see if I want to go ahead and spray. But I'm just going to keep going until things are kind of pruned back to where I want them. Okay, I think I'm done pruning and removing the leaves for now. So let me show you what it looks like. Hopefully you can see a difference. I feel like I can definitely see a difference. First off, here's everything that I pruned off. So let's go ahead and cover that up. I'll put that back in the corner. But this is the center raised bed where I think I removed the most, just because it did seem like it had the worst infestation. So I think you can tell there's a lot more space in between the plants, and I'm just gonna have to keep up on pruning. And I do plan to harvest a bunch of these flowers in the next couple days, so that will help remove, some leaves with powdery mildew as I cut down on the stems. I didn't do too much in this one. Again, this seems like it has some of the least amounts, but I did go ahead and prune. I actually did pull a complete zinnia plant back here because it was just too covered by the others that it wasn't really growing, so that should open up some air space as well. I think I forgot to mention these zinnias. So I did remove some leaves on the mazurkia, but again, they're not that badly covered in powdery mildew. This is probably what was the second worst section, and I think you can tell there's a bunch more space. It actually kind of looks rather empty in the center. I might try to stake some of the zinnias more upright, because this one on the left here is definitely tilting a bit forward, so I might do that. But I think the airflow is much better for those. And then last, over here was my giant binary. And I just pruned off some branches here as well to open up that inside space a little bit. So we'll see how it goes. This is the fungicide I use. So this is the copper fungicide, controls listed plant diseases using low concentrations of copper. It's from Bonide, Captain Jack's. So here are the instructions for the powdery mildew. It says to control powdery mildews, begin treatment 2 weeks before disease normally appears. Did not do that. And then alternatively, begin treatment when disease first appears and repeat at 7 to 10 day intervals for as long as needed. So I could start doing that. It does say spray every 7 days when the amount of disease is increasing rapidly. So once a week if it's growing very quickly. And then if possible, time application so that 12 hours of dry weather follow application. On plants that are very susceptible to powdery mildew, such as home greenhouse grown cucumber, it is best to spray the plants twice a week during the first 2 weeks after emergence and weekly thereafter. On outdoor plants, reapply after rain. We are supposed to get rain, in fact, in just a couple hours, and I feel like I might have just felt a drop. So I'm not going to spray right now. I'll probably do, well, as of tomorrow, the forecast is looking clear. Can never completely trust the weather app though. So I think what I'll do is maybe do it tomorrow early evening, because then I'm not doing it during the high heat of like around noon. Hopefully all of the moisture has dried from the rain. So I think that's going to be my plan. And I'll just keep pruning. I will keep pulling off the dead leaves. I will keep up with this treatment and we'll see how long I can get these zinnias to last. So that's going to be everything I'm going to do today. Again, I should have been more on top of prevention, but I just didn't expect it this early. So different for next year when I'm still growing all the zinnias I love is that I will do more preventative sprays just early on when I get them out. Again, I use this for my fruit trees and I haven't had any fungal issues on those. So good luck so far on that, but I don't want to jinx it. So that's going to be everything. If you have any other powdery mildew tips, whether it's for zinnias or any other types of plants, please leave those in the comments down below and I will see you in the next video. Bye.